Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Darshan Talks. We have Dr. Stephen Towers with us. As Dr. Towers explained to me a little bit earlier, the only person to call him Dr. Towers is his mother, so that has got to make for some interesting conversations. Stephen actually is a Ph.D. He works and straddles the medical affairs and the marketing functions. And he actually recently had a promotion. So, Stephen, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks very much, Darshan. So yeah, Darshan said, and you can see there, I'm Stephen Towers. My new title is VP Strategy and Innovation, and I work at a New York City-based medical communications agency. And as you said, Darshan, maybe about half of the work I've done is in the promo med ed space, and the other half for medical affairs clients. Thanks for inviting me. It's good to be here.
Good to have you. We do want to specify something, which is all the opinions being expressed are just Darshan's and Stephen's. We do not represent our law firms, or in his case, ad agency or medical affairs agency. In my case, I am my law firm, so I guess I am representing that in some way. So we'll keep that in mind. But welcome, Stephen. This is going to be fun. Let's start with some of the basic questions, Stephen. One of the big questions I get when we're talking is the fact that medical affairs is supposed to be insular and marketing is supposed to be its own world, and everyone comes out and goes, wait, why are drug companies marketing? What's your opinion? Should drug companies even be marketing? Why even allow that? Only New Zealand, other than the US, allows that.
Yeah, that's interesting. The inclusion of New Zealand in that list is, I always wonder why New Zealand, but it's a good question. I mean, my feeling is that pharmaceutical companies and biotech companies should market their therapies, because if you think about what is marketing, it's and as you said, my background is a PhD in neurosciences. No, I don't have a marketing degree, but from what I understand, the 4 P's of marketing that everybody talks about is product. So talking about the attributes of what you're selling, its features, functions, its benefits, price and place. All of those things seem fairly legitimate. I think when you get to promotion, then that's an area where it's a much more sort of transactional stance. You're sort of linked to thinking about sales reps, selling the drug. That's quite different from medical affairs.
Right.
But communicating about new therapies, about novel therapies, I think it's not just important for pharmaceutical companies and biotech companies to do. I think they have a responsibility to do, because truly nobody understands the therapy they're developing better than they do.
But why should patients understand it? Shouldn't it be about the clinicians who are actually prescribing this? Well, so I'm talking MDs, DOs, vets, I guess. Why bother educating patients?
I think it's important to educate patients for many reasons. I mean, one way we can educate patients is through HCPs,
right?
Because they are, I guess, the rise of the internet, much the chagrin of HCPs and patients going and diagnosing themselves online. But still, HCPs are one of the major sources of information for patients. It's important for patients to be able to counsel their patients as to overall health decisions, how to manage their chronic conditions. And, of course, there is obviously direct, pharmaceutical company patient education. I think as well, and this is probably something that you with your role are sort of increasingly involved in, is this idea of patient centricity.
Right.
And how, the voice of patients and caregivers should be incorporated more into drug development, and that's something that has really increased in recent years with the 21st Century Cures Act in 2016, and part of that was an FDA initiative to encourage incorporating patient and caregiver voices into drug development. So understanding the experience of the patient, what symptoms of the disease bother them most, and how can that be incorporated into the clinical development of a drug? How can it be translated into clinical endpoints that we use to assess the potential efficacy of the drug? So that's one reason why it's important for pharmaceutical companies to communicate with patients.
So you talk about the importance of communication. You talk about HCP communication. One of the big ways that happens is using journal planning. And I understand you recently spent a fair bit of time in medical journal publication and that area. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's definitely one of the areas I've been working in.
Could you talk a little bit about what that is?
Right. So, I mean, of course, it's important. Really, the sort of foundation for all communication that pharmaceutical and biotech companies should make on their the products they're developing is peer-reviewed articles in medical journals. So the Journal of the American Medical Association, New England Journal of Medicine, and then a whole raft of like more specialist journals for different therapeutic areas. Now, it's important, obviously, that the expert clinicians who have been involved in the design or the conduct of the clinical trial, it's important that they are the authors of the articles that are published. But certainly, in recent years, publication support is what we call it. Medical communications professionals, medical writers can play a major role, I think, in improving the quality of articles that are published in the scientific literature. And for that reason, it sort of facilitates the communication and the education of stakeholders, patients, HCPs, payers. So I mean, the key thing to emphasize, of course, here is because there were a number of sort of scandals in the late 1990s, but of course, reported more recently, there was a while where these stories used to crop up in the New York Times very often, it seemed, about ghostwriting, right, which is something that the industry has addressed head on, and that's where the pharmaceutical company essentially would write the article, and top key opinion leaders, KOLs as we call them, medical experts, would just sort of put their name to it. That doesn't happen now. It's very very carefully regulated, and there's a number of policy documents, guidelines, good publication practice, which regulate that.
So we talk about the regulations, we talk about the guidelines that prevent things like ghostwriting. However, there is that, as you put it, publication support position or availability. And if that's true, how do you handle the issue of, for example, it sort of provides a tunnel or a channel for marketing to potentially influence the actual journal writing? Or do you think that that's not true? And if so, why not?
I don't think that is true anymore. Certainly not any pharmaceutical company I've worked with. Things are very firewall in publications and marketing, as they should be. And really, what you get when you get a pharmaceutical industry supported article in medical journals or in scientific journals now is something that I think you can be pretty confident is free of that sort of bias, is free of that interference from commercial considerations, and it should just report the results in an honest and a transparent way.
So what would someone? So let's say I have a clinical study that I worked on, and I have the raw data, and I have a really high profile physician who was on the paper, who performed some of the research. What are the services someone like your company, someone like you potentially would provide? Would you show them how to write it out, or would you go, here are the concepts you want to keep in mind? Do you talk about things like the target product profile? Where do you come in, and how do you optimize things?
Well, what we do is provide editorial support. We provide support sometimes for generating figures. Mm-hmm. But really, everything we do is at the direction of the authors. There's nothing we do. We don't develop it. We don't develop an outline. We don't suggest a potential journal they may wish to submit the manuscript to. None of that. Nothing is done without the direction of the authors. And the important thing to emphasize that at every stage of development, developing the outline, developing the first draft of the manuscript that's submitted to the journal, and then incorporating any comments that come back from after it's reviewed. Everything is done with the input of the authors. So part of it is a sort of logistic exercise. Really, it's to sort of coordinate the dissemination of the various drafts of the journal, making sure that all of the authors provide their comments. If all don't provide their comments at every stage, then they can't be an author according to good publication practice guidelines.
According to the ISMP guidelines.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So you're helping with this, and you're seeing industry improve. What one of the conversations I've had this one with numerous clients actually, but is this evolving role of medical affairs, and people use the word evolving, but they're very amorphous about what that word evolving means. I expect partly because I often represent a legal or compliance role, partly because they don't want to admit what that could look like, partly because they don't know. What do you see medical affairs evolving into?
Well, I think in recent years, and in a fairly short space of time, I'm sure it's something you've noticed, that medical affairs, I mean, it was originally sort of emerged, I think, in response to pressure from primarily regulators to separate the medical and the commercial functions of pharmaceutical companies, and to have sort of transparent, free of bias communications that were sort of created and that were sort of disseminated to individuals in the company who were not going to be compensated for sales. And so really that was sort of where medical affairs, my understanding is, it sort of arose. But in recent years, it's really sort of expanded its role and the range of activities that it's involved in. And one thing to sort of say, we've seen over the years that there's been a real decline in the number of sales reps, and thinking about that decline in the number of sales reps, you're kind of left with medical science liaisons, who are the field-based arm of the medical affairs division in pharmaceutical companies, as almost being like the main bridge between the internal departments in the pharmaceutical company and the external customers. So the key opinion leaders, those expert physicians, some other HCPs, patients, advocates, payers, regulators. And they're the main sort of, in many cases, I think increasingly becoming the main people who sort of educate external stakeholders about new products developed by pharmaceutical companies. And if you think about it, the folks who are medical science liaisons, they unlike I think a lot of sales reps, they have advanced degrees. They have like Ph.Ds or MDs in some cases. And I think that's sort of really that scientific training, that advanced scientific training is important to sort of be able to both understand and communicate the nuances of the increasingly sophisticated treatments that are being developed to customers. You think about the rise of genetic medicine, gene therapy, gene editing, RNA therapeutics. There's a lot of very complex high science to develop it, and to communications on and to disseminate to those external audiences. And really, medical affairs and medical science liaisons are the best people to do that. I think in terms of internal, let's say, definition of product value, medical affairs also plays an important role because they have that deep and sort of nuanced understanding. So they can really play an equal role, or in some cases even a greater role than their marketing colleagues in helping to define the value of a product, working on that target product profile that all companies develop, and also creating a story, creating a narrative that can talk about the attributes of this novel therapy and how it can improve the lives of patients in whatever the therapeutic area. So really, they've sort of come into their own, I think, both in terms of that definition of product value, in terms of that storytelling about the product, and in terms of going out there into the field and disseminating that information and explaining and educating it to like a variety of stakeholders out there.
So that's really interesting to me because you talk about the fact that sales reps can get in, but at the same time you talk about medical affairs having the opportunity to educate clinicians of a variety of different degrees and different clinical settings. But here's my question. If medical affairs is going in and educating, how do you draw that distinction between sales and medical affairs at that point, outside the degree?
How do you draw that distinction? I mean, I think in terms of the sort of information that's communicated, we expect medical affairs to be a trusted source of unbiased medical information on products. And I think the fact that they are to some extent siloed and firewalled from the commercial team, I think is the basis of that trust. So really, it's all about educating. It's about explaining how a treatment works, how it can improve the lives of patients potentially, what are the benefits and risks, that kind of information. So I think if medical affairs was ever to lose that degree of autonomy from from marketing, then it would be in trouble, and it would lose a lot of its value and a lot of its credibility.
Right. So what I hear you saying, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that one of the big distinctions is the fact that these are clinicians, these are people who went in because they want to improve lives, improve the health of patients, and therefore they have that credibility that's stopping them. Is that fair, or am I putting words in your mouth?
I think that is true, but I would sort of be, you and I talked about this before we got on the call today. I think folks on the marketing department and in all functions in pharmaceutical companies are to a great extent in it to improve the lives of patients. I think you mentioned sometimes people talk about the marketing department as being the dark side. Sometimes people move from medical affairs to marketing and they talk about, oh yeah, I went over to the dark side. And it's a bit of fun, and it's unfortunate in a way because it really does obscure the fact that the vast majority of people working in the biopharmaceutical industry are doing that because they believe in the mission of the company, which is really to sort of develop therapies that improve the duration and the quality of people's lives. And everybody I've encountered in the sort of 12 years I've been working in this area has been incredibly committed to that goal. So.
And I agree. I actually work with marketing all the time, and I work with medical affairs all the time, and they definitely are committed. I'm sort of trying to help the audience. It wasn't necessarily a contrast as much as explaining. But okay, so let's go into the question you raised right after. What you sort of said was that both divisions of the company they come at this with the goal of improving lives. What are the opportunities that you see are missed for medical affairs to learn from marketing and for marketing to learn from medical affairs?
That's a really good question. Let me think on that. I think they do in most companies. So, although they are firewalled, there is sort of collaboration between the two already. So it's not like these folks never talk to each other. Right. They do. Medical affairs, I think, does essentially sit at the nexus of clinical, market access, regulatory, commercial, and has an important role there. And I think they are uniquely positioned to sort of foster collaboration between these different divisions in the pharmaceutical company, and increasingly they are. But to your question, like what does one miss that the other? What was the question again?
Well, here's what I think of. I think they're both excellent. When I think of marketing, I think of excellent communicators. When I think of medical affairs, I think of excellent educators. The question is, what is the difference, and how can one train the other? and I go vice versa.
Yeah, and that's a good question. I mean, you need to be a good communicator to be a good educator, right?
Right.
Having that sort of deep understanding of whatever it is you're trying to educate. But I mean, we've all had like college professors who were like incredibly smart, some of the best people in their field, but were terrible lecturers, and others were maybe sort of less high flying, less accomplished in a research sense, but were just kept you sort of spellbound and held your attention for the full hour. And I think thinking about storytelling, I think storytelling is key here. Because there's a cognitive bias, which I'm sure you're aware of, called the curse of knowledge, and it's essentially a bias that makes some people, that makes some experts find it difficult to sort of reconstruct their understanding of a topic, of a complex topic, and finds it hard to sort of go back to a period where they didn't understand it, and then be able to explain it to other people who don't understand it. So. I would say that's maybe where marketing can help a little bit with medical affairs. It's in that storytelling. But then medical communications agencies and folks like my employer can also sort of help both medical affairs and marketing in that storytelling function. And that answers a question which I know you didn't ask, but I'll answer anyway. But when I left my academic career and came into this field, I think my parents and friends said, well, why don't pharmaceutical companies just develop their own communications? Why don't they do that themselves? They could hire people to do that. And I think the answer to that is that to be good educators, you need to be a good storyteller, and you don't automatically become a good storyteller by having that specialist knowledge. And really sort of people who work in my industry are good storytellers as well as understanding the science. So I often say to people, when they say, are you a scientist? And I say, well, I'm an ex-scientist. I'm a recovering scientist. I like to think of myself more as a communications consultant, a communications specialist now with a scientific background.
So this is weird. I've never heard of this before, but I'm sure it happens. How often do you end up actually educating medical affairs on how to communicate? Is that a training webinar thing that happens? I've just never seen it, but I could.
Public speakings.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes we do that, and we work with people who are. I like to think we're all communications experts to some extent, but coaching somebody, mentoring somebody in public speaking skills is a very sort of specific part of that, right? It's not something I'm necessarily that adept at, but we certainly do a lot of speaker training events and programs for medical affairs and for marketing.
Fair enough. We've been talking primarily about field-based actors. We've been talking about MSLs. We've been talking about sales reps. Do the rules change from the context of what they can learn from each other in terms of marketing and medical affairs? Because at that point, they're both removed a little bit from direct patient contact, aren't they? They're more, I hate to put it this way, but it's more strategic, if you will, for lack of a better term. If that's true, what are the opportunities for them to engage with each other better, to actually with the goal of improving patient lives?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I guess you have your field-based team that has that that has that one-on-one contact with HCPs, with key opinion leaders, and other stakeholders in the field. The way I've always seen it is that you have your sort of centrally based, like non-field based medical affairs who are important, in terms of developing that story, developing the strategy. But they do that based on information from the field team. And insights that they get from those one-on-one conversations with all those stakeholders. So most companies I've worked with, they do seem to have like a sort of fairly well-established process for communicating insights from the field to headquarters, if you like, and then incorporating those insights into the materials that are generated. And similarly as well, MSLs in the field will say, we really need some kind of video or some kind of slide presentation or some kind of resource to help us explain the effect of the drug, or maybe it's the mechanism of action, or maybe maybe something else. So it's kind of a two-way process.
Fair enough. Stephen, we've sort of run out of time. We're beyond where we thought we would be. How can people reach you if they have questions?
They can reach me through LinkedIn. Is probably the easiest way to do. I'm not sure if you're listening, biographical information or whatever, but I can provide that. You can
Absolutely.
add that to the bio, yeah.
And you can find Stephen on LinkedIn at Stephen Towers, Ph.D.
Yep. Absolutely.
Perfect. Again, thank you so much for coming on. This was wonderful. I hope you'll come back again.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.